Hi, good morning,
Good
everybody.
morning.
Good morning, everybody. We're here to read Urantia to you. This is Kim.
I'm Andy.
Yep. And we're reading from paper 177 and part 4, Judas and the Chief Priests. So, as you know, Judas is getting ready to betray Jesus to the Pharisees, and they're getting ready to go pick him up. So, Andy, do you want to start reading?
Sure. Shortly after Jesus and John Mark left the camp, Judas Iscariot disappeared from among his brethren, not returning until late in the afternoon. This confused and discontented apostle, notwithstanding his master's specific request to refrain from entering Jerusalem, went in haste to keep his appointment with Jesus' enemies at the home of Caiaphas, the high priest. This was an informal meeting of the Sanhedrin and had been appointed for shortly after 10 o'clock that morning. This meeting was called to discuss the nature of the charges which would be lodged against Jesus and to decide upon the procedure to be employed in bringing him before the Roman authorities for the purpose of securing the necessary civil confirmation of the death sentence which they had already passed upon him.
Okay, very good. Okay. On the preceding day, Jesus had disclosed to some of his relatives and to certain Sadducean friends of his father's family that he had reached the conclusion that while Jesus was a well meaning dreamer and idealist, he was not the expected deliverer of Israel. Judas stated that he would very much like to find some way of withdrawing gracefully from the whole movement. His friends flatteringly assured him that his withdrawal would be hailed by the Jewish rulers as a great event and that nothing would be too good for him. They led him to believe that he would forthwith receive high honors from the Sanhedrin and that he would at last be in a position to erase the stigma of his well meant but unfortunate association with the untaught Galileans.
Judas could not quite believe that the mighty works of the Master had been wrought by the power of the prince of devils, but he was now fully convinced that Jesus would not exert his power in the self-aggrandizement. He was at last convinced that Jesus would allow himself to be destroyed by the Jewish rulers, and he could not endure the humiliating thought of being identified with a movement of defeat.
Yes,
That
I think
sounds
that
contemporary.
reveals, yeah, a lot.
He refused to entertain the idea of apparent failure. He thoroughly understood the sturdy character of his master and the keenness of that majestic and merciful mind. Yet he derived pleasure from even the partial entertainment of the suggestion of one of his relatives that Jesus, while he was a well-meaning fanatic, was probably not really sound of mind, that he had always appeared to be a strange and misunderstood person. Wow. So Judas is having second thoughts about the whole Jesus
Well, yeah,
thing.
he's been having second thoughts for a while, but now he's deciding to act on that definitively.
Because he's not a loser.
He's not going to be a loser.
Yep.
Not going to. Yep, like somebody else maybe
Yeah.
we know.
Yep.
Yep. And it says he derives pleasure. Where does it say that? Yeah, he appreciates it. That Jesus has a majestic and merciful mind, but he kind of likes it when people tear him down.
Yeah, kind of I don't know, a WWE kind of side to that.
I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Well, we build them up and we like to knock them down, don't we? And now, as never before, Judas found himself becoming strangely resentful that Jesus had never assigned him a position of greater honor. All along, He had appreciated the honor of being the apostolic treasurer. That's a lot of responsibility, Judas,
Mm-hmm.
right? We
Mhm.
trust you a lot with the funds,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
But now he began to feel that he was not appreciated, that his abilities were unrecognized. He was suddenly overcome with indignation that Peter, James, and John should have been honored with close association with Jesus. And at this time, when he was on the way to the high priest's home, he was bent on getting even with Peter, James, and John more than he was concerned with any thought of betraying Jesus. But over and above all, just then, a new and dominating thought began to occupy the forefront of his conscious mind. He had set out to get honor for himself. And if this could be secured simultaneously with getting even with those who had contributed to the greatest disappointment of his life, all the better. He was seized with a terrible conspiracy of confusion, pride, desperation, and determination. And so it must be plain that it was not for money that Judas was then on his way to the home of Caiaphas to arrange for the betrayal of Jesus. Okay, that's very interesting because that's, we always heard that he sold Jesus for somewhat 30 pieces of silver. What was it? Something
Yep,
like that?
exactly.
Yeah. But it really wasn't that. It was this distortion of his thinking.
It was
And
jealousy.
it was jealousy, it was envy.
He wanted to be part of the
Inner circle, and he
Yep.
was, and he wasn't the only ones. Peter, James, John, and Andrew was kind of their leader. Yeah, Peter, James, and John were mostly always with Jesus. So there was, how many other guys that were kind of like around that inner core and very, grateful for their positions and went on to be faithful and listened, Matthew, Thomas. Matthew was a publican, and Nathaniel and Philip, all those guys, right?
Right. Sometimes being part of the inner circle is not all it's
Yeah,
thought to be.
right,
Yeah.
right.
As Judas approached the home of Caiaphas, he arrived at
You're right.
He arrived at the final decision to abandon Jesus and his fellow apostles, and having thus made up his mind to desert the cause of the kingdom of heaven, he was determined to secure for himself as much as possible of that honor and glory that he had thought would sometime be his when he first identified himself with Jesus and the new gospel of the kingdom. All of the apostles once shared this ambition with Judas, but as time passed, they learned to admire truth and to love Jesus at least more than did Judas.
Okay. So the other apostles love Jesus truly, even though they first had the same kind of idea that he's gonna, be powerful and bring back the kingdom, and they can get, secure some good positions in the administration of this new kingdom and all this. But later they come to really love Jesus, but Judas didn't. The traitor was presented to Caiaphas and the Jewish rulers by his cousin, who explained that Judas, having discovered his mistake in allowing himself to be misled by the subtle teaching of Jesus, had arrived at the place where he wished to make public and formal renunciation of his association with the Galilean, and at the same time ask for reinstatement in the confidence and fellowship of his Judean brethren. This spokesman for Judas went on to explain that Judas recognized it would be best for the peace of Israel if Jesus should be taken into custody, and that, as evidence of his sorrow in having participated in such a movement of error, and as proof of his sincerity in now returning to the teachings of Moses, he had come to offer himself to the Sanhedrin as one who could so arrange with the captain holding the old orders for Jesus' arrest that he could be taken into custody quietly, thus avoiding any danger of stirring up the multitudes for the necessity or the necessity of postponing his arrest until after the Passover.
When his cousin had finished speaking, he presented Judas, who, stepping forward near the high priest, said, "All that my cousin has promised I will do, but what are you willing to give me for this service?" Judas did not seem to discern the look of disdain and even disgust that came over the face of the hard-hearted and vainglorious Caiaphas. His heart was too much set on self-glory and the craving for the satisfaction of self-exaltation.
Right. What do I get out of it? Yeah, sure. Right.
And Caiaphas correctly perceived, "Ooh, who is this guy?"
Yeah. You're just in this for your own gain.
Yeah,
You're not really trying to get a real place of honor in their establishment either.
right,
Really.
right,
You're just, you know,
right.
so obvious he's kind of playing both sides.
hmm
He's been doing that. Okay. And when Caiaphas looked down upon the betrayer while he said, "Judas, you go to the captain of the guard and arrange with that officer to bring your master to us either tonight or tomorrow night. And when he has been delivered by you into our hands, you shall receive your reward for this service." When Judas heard this, he went forth from the presence of the chief priests and rulers and took counsel with the captain of the temple guards as to the manner in which Jesus was to be apprehended. Judas knew that Jesus was then absent from the camp and had no idea when he would return that evening. And so they agreed among themselves to arrest Jesus the next evening, Thursday, after the people of Jerusalem had all of the visiting pilgrims had retired for the night.
Judas returned to his associates at the camp, intoxicated with thoughts of grandeur and glory, such as he had not had for many a day. He had enlisted with Jesus, hoping to become a great man in the new kingdom. He had at last realized that there was to be no new kingdom from such as he had anticipated. But he rejoiced in being so sagacious as to trade off his disappointment in failing to achieve glory in an anticipated new kingdom for the immediate realization of honor and reward in the old order, which he now believed would survive and which he was certain would destroy Jesus and all that he stood for. In its last motive of conscious intention, Judas's betrayal of Jesus was the cowardly act of a selfish deserter who was his own safety and glorification. No matter what might be the results of his conduct with his master and upon his former associates.
Right. Cowardly. Selfish, cowardly.
Mhm.
But it was ever just that way. Judas had long been engaged in this deliberate, persistent, selfish, and vengeful consciousness of progressively building up in his mind and entertaining in his heart these hateful and evil desires of revenge and disloyalty. Jesus loved and trusted Judas, even as he loved and trusted the other apostles, but Judas failed to develop loyal trust and to experience wholehearted love in return. And how dangerous ambition can become when it is once wholly wedded to self seeking and supremely motivated by sudden and long suppressed vengeance. What a crushing thing is disappointment in the lives of those foolish persons who, in fastening their gaze on the shadowy and evanescent allurements of time, become blinded to the higher and more real achievements of the everlasting attainments of the eternal world of divine values and true spiritual realities. Judas craved worldly honor in his mind and grew to love this desire with his whole heart. The other apostles likewise craved this same worldly honor in their minds, but with their hearts they loved Jesus and were doing their best to learn to love the truths which he taught them. So that was kind of where they parted ways. Judas failed to love Jesus and failed to experience these higher realities. He just loved, he just fixated on this desire for self-aggrandizement.
Being an important person in this new kingdom.
Right, right.
Judas did not realize it at this time, but he had been a subconscious critic of Jesus ever since John the Baptist was beheaded by Herod. Deep down in his heart, Judas always resented the fact that Jesus did not save John. You should not forget that Judas had been a disciple of John before he became a follower of Jesus, and all these accumulations of human resentment and bitter disappointment which Judas had laid by in his soul in habiliments of hate were now well organized in his subconscious mind and ready to spring up to engulf him when he once dared to separate himself from the supporting influence of his brethren, while at the same time exposing himself to the clever insinuations and subtle ridicule of the enemies of Jesus. Every time Judas allowed his hopes to soar high, and Jesus would do or say something to dash them to pieces, there was always left in Judas's heart a scar of bitter resentment. And as these scars multiplied, presently that heart, so often wounded, lost all real affection for the one who had inflicted this distasteful experience upon a well-intentioned but cowardly and self-centered personality. Judas did not realize it, but he was a coward. Accordingly, he was always inclined to assign to Jesus cowardice as the motive to which led him so often to refuse to grasp for power or glory when they were apparently within his easy reach. And every mortal man knows full well how love, even when once genuine, can, through disappointment, jealousy, and long continued resentment, be eventually turned into actual hate. At last, the chief priests and elders could breathe easily for a few hours. They would not have to arrest Jesus in public, and the securing of Judas as a traitorous ally ensured that Jesus would not escape from their jurisdiction as he had so many times in the past.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's the end. I think that's pretty straightforward, and
That adds a lot to my understanding of where Judas was coming from
yeah,
and why the arrest took place away from the supporters of Jesus.
yep, they had to be sneaky about it.
There might have been a riot.
Right, exactly. They didn't want that. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye now.